Hi, it's Katrina. Temple to the Wind God. While workers in Mexico were demolishing a supermarket, they came across some curious archaeological remains. They called in some experts to help dig, and they uncovered the remnants of a temple built over 650 years ago. There is not much left of the temple now, just a circular platform around 36 feet in diameter and 4 feet 9 inches tall, currently sitting in the shadow of a shopping center. The archaeologists say that it was a temple dedicated to the god of wind, Quetzalcoatl. To give a bit of background on the temple, it's important to know that modern Mexico City was built over the bones of several pre-Hispanic cities, including the capital of the Aztec Empire, Tenochtitlan. When the Spanish conquered the city, they began to build their structures over the ones that were destroyed. They built churches over Aztec temples, burying them for hundreds of years. In this way, the mysterious temple got covered by the modern city, and then a supermarket was built on top of it. Once excavated, archaeologists with the National Institute of Anthropology and History found at least 8 ancient human bodies, many shards of pottery, and of course, the temple itself. Researcher Pedro Francisco Sanchez Nava says the Aztecs had worshipped the wind god at this temple as one of their primary deities. They would have made offerings to the god of wind to ensure things like a good harvest. And yes, many of these offerings had likely been sacrifices of human hearts and blood, a common practice at the time to appease the angry gods. Who could imagine that such a blood-soaked and mysterious history lay hidden beneath something as mundane as a supermarket? The Mysterious Stepwell. Chand Bowery is an incredibly fascinating stairwell located in Rajasthan, India. This is no ordinary stairwell. It's more like a stair temple. It's also technically called a stepwell. Images of the place are so captivating it's almost unreal. It's been used in Bollywood films and has even had Hollywood film sets modeled after it. But just what in the world is a stepwell, and what was this one meant for? It was built as an underground well to hold water for those living nearby. The stairs were so that locals could climb down to wherever the top of the water was. It's one of the largest stepwells in the entire world, and also one of the most beautiful. The structure has a precise geometrical pattern, and the steps form a magical-looking maze. The consequent play of the light and shadows give it a really unique look. It's one of the few classical stepwells surviving in India today, with its oldest parts going all the way back to the 8th century at least. Chand Bowery has a total of 3,500 narrow steps arranged in perfect symmetry, descending 65 feet, over 13 stories, to the bottom of the well. And it's rumored that it was built in one night. But that is just legend, of course. It would take some kind of superhuman to do that. The bottom of the well has air over 10 degrees cooler than the temperature at the surface. The community would gather down at the bottom of the stepwell in the hottest months to stay cool and refreshed. A palace was added at the very top of the stairs, built by the original Chanchan rulers. You're not actually allowed to visit this area of Chand Bowery today, though, not as a tourist at least, because it is sealed off to visitors. The final parts of the stepwell were built fairly recently in the 18th century, while the Mughals still ruled India. These magical places have been around for a very long time. The Guanajuato mummies. In the small city of Guanajuato in central Mexico, archaeologists were shocked to discover hundreds of terrifying mummies with their faces still twisted in terror from when they died. When the science fiction author Ray Bradbury visited Guanajuato back in 1947, he described the mummies he saw there as shocking and horrifying, claiming that he had nightmares after his visit. The story behind the mummies goes back to the 1850s, to a time when the world was stricken by a horrible cholera epidemic. Death rates in Mexico spiked significantly, so much so that they started running out of room in their underground crypts to put the bodies. As a result, they began burying the dead in new crypts above ground. But by 1865, the government had instituted a burial tax. This forced families to pay money to keep their family members buried in the ground. When the families couldn't come up with the taxes, the bodies of their loved ones were excavated and moved into a storage facility. It was when people stopped paying the tax and the bodies started being excavated that the first Guanajuato mummies were found. People were appalled to see that they still looked the same as when they died, twisted in their final moments of horror. In one case, the mummy of a woman was biting into her own arm. It was believed that she had most likely been buried alive when symptoms of her disease made her heart appear to have stopped. There was also a mummy of a woman who died in childbirth, and her 24-week-old fetus. It is no surprise that Ray Bradbury was inspired by the gruesome and awful things he witnessed in Guanajuato, enough to write the next in line, a story about evil supernatural sources. Jiangdu Mausoleum. In 2009, archaeologists discovered a 2,100-year-old royal tomb north of Shanghai in Jiangsu, China. It belonged to a king named Liu Fei, who ruled over the Jiangdu kingdom for 26 years until he died in 128 BC. It took 3 years to excavate his underground mausoleum made up of many tombs that were once covered by a large earthen mound. 2 115-foot-long shafts led directly to the king's tomb. What made this discovery particularly fascinating was the sheer volume of treasures found in Liu Fei's royal tomb. Even though this site had already been looted and plundered, the burial contained over 10,000 artifacts. This includes gold, silver, bronze, jade, and lacquer treasures. There were also numerous life-size chariots accompanied by several dozen smaller models. A collection of weapons found in the tomb consists of iron swords, spearheads, knives, and 2-handled pole weapons called halberds. The king must have also been a fan of musical instruments, since the researchers uncovered chime bells, parts from stringed instruments called zithers, and jade tuning pegs decorated with dragons. These lavish grave goods would have only been furnished for a ruler with extremely high-end taste. Liu Fei certainly fit the profile for this type, according to the ancient historian Sima Qian, who described the king's lifestyle as marked by extreme arrogance and luxury. The mausoleum consists of 3 main tombs, 11 attendant tombs, 2 chariot and horse pits, and 2 weaponry pits, according to a scholarly article the team wrote for an archaeological journal. The archaeologists also found the remains of a wall that once encircled the site, measuring 1,608 feet on each side. They investigated the mausoleum as part of a rescue excavation when it came to light that the complex was threatened by quarrying or digging out large amounts of rock nearby. Sadly, the king's remains were long gone, and while normally his remains would have been encased in an incredible suit of jade, archaeologists only found shattered tiny pieces. This indicates that whoever arrived here before took the most valuable item, but even the tiny fragments left behind indicate that this tomb and coffin would have been a very impressive sight to behold. Nearby, there is a tomb that is also missing the remains of whoever was buried there, but there is an entire jade coffin still intact, making it the only undamaged jade coffin discovered in China. The High Priest's Mummy. An extremely well-preserved mummy from 2,500 years ago has just been discovered in Egypt, and while this in itself obviously isn't that rare, coming from Egypt and all, it is the way that it was revealed to the world that was very unique. Archaeologists are getting with the times, and decided to open it live on the Discovery Channel during a 2-hour-long event. It was the first time in the world that such an impressive mummy was revealed on live television and broadcast across the globe. Did you watch this? The incredible discovery itself was made at the small and remote site of Al Gharifa, about 165 miles from Cairo. The archaeologists found a single tomb with inner burial chambers and a network of ancient tunnels. The hieroglyphs revealed that it belonged to a high priest. They also discovered the remains of an ancient board game, the mummified remains of a family dog, and 4 jars containing organs. There was also a mysterious wax head that was cast to look like the high priest. They'd made a spitting image of his face out of solid wax. Archaeologists don't know much more than that. It's a mysterious necropolis that was first discovered in 1927. Although not much attention was ever given to it, they did find the sarcophagus of another high priest back then, but the mummy was missing. So this discovery was much more exciting. India's underwater city. In the Gulf of Cambay, off the coast of India, marine archaeologists have discovered the remains of what could be a lost city from 9,500 years ago. This city is currently submerged underwater, only detected by using sonar scanning technology. The marine archaeologists sent beams of sound waves to the bottom of the sea, which picked up evidence of a collection of large geometric structures. The area measures about 5 miles long and is believed to be an entire city that sank into the water over 5,000 years before any other city was built in India. Roughly the size of Manhattan, it's located about 25 miles from the shore, 120 feet deep. However, the underwater city is not only mysterious, but most mainstream scientists don't even believe it's real. In fact, it's been claimed as nothing but pseudo-archaeology. The truth of the matter is that when the Ice Age ended and the ice caps melted, the sea level rose 400 feet. It's no surprise that coastal settlements built by ancient people were lost because of the rising waters, and so many argue that this could be one of them. But even if this is true, the big question remaining is who built this city and where did the people go? It wouldn't have flooded all at once, but slowly over time. It definitely looks like a city from a lost civilization, yet it's been impossible to find funding for researchers to go down and look at the potential ruins. Mainstream scientists like Dr. D.P. Agrawal with the Paleoclimate Group says that the researchers didn't find a sunken city, but merely a large collection of archaeological remains from a more recent time that fell into the ocean and spread across a large area. Unfortunately, it's hard to explore underwater and get a closer look. Babylon's Tower of Babel. Many people believe that the Tower of Babel is nothing more than a biblical metaphor, while others believe the tower was once a very real structure. The Bible says that the tower was built in the land of Shinar, which is Old Babylonia. It was allegedly constructed after the Great Flood commissioned by King Nebuchadnezzar II. In 586 BC, trying to conquer the world as he knew it, King Nebuchadnezzar II stormed Jerusalem, a city 500 miles to the west, capturing its most highly skilled and highly educated citizens, and brought them back with him to build the tower. While it's true that the actual tower itself hasn't been discovered, archaeologists recently found some evidence that could be linked to this mysterious ancient structure. Specifically, they have found bricks from Babylonia stamped with the seal of King Nebuchadnezzar II himself. Whatever these bricks were used for, the legendary king was the one who commissioned them. The structure they belong to has long since been picked apart and thrown away, but it could have been the real Tower of Babel, located in what is today Iraq, about 16 miles from Baghdad. French Massacre. Archaeologists have discovered the mutilated remains of victims of a genocide in northeast France. But this was no recent genocide. It was a massacre that happened 6,000 years ago. Researchers uncovered 10 bodies inside an ancient pit, with the Neolithic people inside clearly having suffered horrible deaths. They showed proof of cuts all across their bodies, including deep lacerations to their heads. The bodies were also lumped together in such a way that suggests they were thrown into the pit haphazardly and without care. According to Philippe Lefranc, one of the archaeologists working on the case, these people were brutally executed, probably by some kind of axe. The remains included the bodies of 5 adults, an adolescent, and the arms of 4 other different individuals. These arms were likely war trophies, a fairly common practice at the time. The main theory right now is that a group of warriors from the Parisian Basin attempted to raid the area of Alsace, where the bodies were discovered. The raid, it seems, failed miserably. Ultimately, however, archaeologists say that the Parisians eventually successfully replaced the Alsatians by 4200 BC. The evidence can be seen in the changes in cultural artifacts of the time. Massive Roman coin hoard. Around 1800 years ago, someone buried over 5,500 silver coins in what is now Augsburg, Germany. They never returned to collect their stash. The massive hoard of Roman denarii remained untouched until earlier this year, when archaeologists unearthed the coins from an old riverbed. They were found scattered, most likely from a flood that had washed them away from their original hiding spot. An ancient coin expert said that the youngest coin the team has identified so far appears to have been minted at the beginning of the 3rd century. They believe that the hoard was buried around the same time near a road outside of the Roman city of Augusta Vindelicum. But the team hasn't figured out who hid the coins or why. They found no other artifacts nearby, leaving the hoard a standalone mystery that may never be solved. At the time the money was buried, the Roman Empire was thriving, but it was approaching a tumultuous time known as the Crisis of the 3rd century. This period of destabilization started around 235 and nearly saw the empire collapse as barbarians and other tribes migrated into Roman territory. The archaeologists who found the coin hoard haven't speculated about whether they think the stash has anything to do with the crisis, but it's hard not to wonder if it's a possibility. Viking warrior sword. Archaeologists in Norway unearthed a grave of a Viking warrior who died 1100 years ago. Inside his grave, they found a steel sword placed on his left side. This is unusual because in life, the sword would have been placed on his right hip. Archaeologists say it could have been placed on the wrong side because of the Viking perception of the afterlife. To them, the afterlife was supposed to be a mirror image of the normal world. So, whoever buried this warrior may have been accounting for that fact. They thought of everything. Raymond Salvage from the Norwegian University of Science and Technology says the Vikings placed all kinds of grave goods in the opposite spot of where they would normally be placed, all for the purpose of the mirror world. This warrior and his grave were not the only recent discoveries made in Norway either. Archaeologists found this particular grave during routine excavations prior to roadwork near a small village. They also found 9 other burial mounds, at least 20 graves, a pair of mortuary houses, and 3 impressive boat graves. Most of the people buried in these graves were warriors, entombed with things like spears, axes, and shields, and most of these artifacts were placed on the opposite side so that the dead could have access to them in the mirror world of the afterlife. A medieval tunnel. A routine excavation in the country of Wales revealed a mysterious medieval tunnel in the Wye Valley. It happened when workers were called in to remove an old electrical pole. When the team removed the pole, they found the entrance to the tunnel. According to Alan Gore with the Western Power Distribution, the tunnel does not appear on any of their ordnance survey maps. Nobody, not even locals, had any clue that it was there. The tunnel was first discovered as nothing more than a small entrance to what was assumed to be a cave. There was an opening beneath a cluster of rocks, pretty much completely obscured by overgrowth. When the team dug a little deeper, they realized it wasn't a cave at all, but a tunnel built of stone. Sadly, most of it had already caved in, so there was no way to follow it to its end. Nonetheless, they think the tunnel follows a public footpath towards a 12th century abbey called Tintern Abbey, which was constructed by Cistercian monks. The ruins of this place receive thousands of visitors every year, and yet nobody knew they were walking over a collapsed ancient tunnel from medieval times. From what evidence has been gathered so far, the tunnel appears to be about 4 feet tall. It could have been used for people to crawl undetected through the countryside, but nobody has been able to figure out just why these monks would have carved a mysterious subterranean passage. Just makes you want to know more, doesn't it? Mysterious graves. Archaeologists in France have come across a very mysterious graveyard from 1,400 years ago. The site has brought to light a bizarre habit of people living in Europe during the Middle Ages. They had a tendency to reopen graves, take certain things out of them, and then rebury the person. The tradition of digging up graves periodically has been documented from Transylvania to England. But this wasn't traditional grave robbing. Between the 6th and 8th centuries AD, people opened graves and took out objects that weren't worth anything, meaning it probably wasn't grave robbery so much as an odd kind of tradition. At this particular graveyard in France, archaeologists are still trying to figure out why the graves were pillaged for seemingly worthless items and then sealed back up. The robbers took brooches and swords, yet left behind precious jewelry of gold and silver. Alison Klevnes, a researcher with Stockholm University, says the people only removed things that were of no practical use or monetary value, which means it was probably sentimental. So far, researchers say stealing things from freshly dug graves probably had some kind of symbolic motivation. It could be that relatives were taking back heirlooms and then handing them down to their young relatives. But the truth is that we can't say for sure. Haunted house fail. There's nothing quite as creepy as the stuff you find in an abandoned house. But in Norway, South Carolina, things got extra ghoulish when a group of friends broke into a haunted house and stumbled upon a dead body. The group of friends had been driving around on their ATVs in a remote area when they came across the abandoned home that was rumored to be haunted. Naturally, they had to go in and check it out. At first, everything seemed the normal amount of creepy. The house was full of old junk. It clearly hadn't been lived in for quite some time, and it looked as if the Blair Witch may have been using it as her forest hideout. But as the group of teenagers rummaged through the house, they couldn't help but notice the putrid stench of rot that followed them everywhere. When they went to the back porch, the smell of rot was even more powerful. The only thing on the back porch other than a pile of garbage was a deep freezer. When they bravely opened the freezer, they saw a dead man in blue jeans and socks. They immediately ran away and called the authorities. local deputies never were able to confirm the identity of the body, and 2 days after its discovery became public knowledge, the abandoned house mysteriously burned down. Leprosy in the Caribbean. Petite Moustique is a small, uninhabited Caribbean island measuring just 100 acres. It's part of a group of islands collectively known as St. Vincent and the Grenadines. There are no easy landings or large beaches, and the island is inconveniently hilly, which explains why nobody lives there. But people have passed through there. In 2003, archaeologists found a human skull on Petite Moustique. They recently dated it to sometime during the late 18th or early 19th century and identified cranial deformities that are consistent with leprosy. It's the earliest known solid evidence of the disease in the Americas, and one of just a handful of examples of leprosy being identified on a skeleton in the Western Hemisphere. Records suggest that leprosy made its way to the Caribbean as far back as the mid-17th century, but these reports are incomplete, and the skull is helping to paint a more complete picture of the disease's history in the region. This study also found documents indicating that there may have been a special hospital on the island during the early 19th century. Patients would have been brought there and kept separate from the uninfected population as part of an effort to curb the spread of the disease. Leprosy was particularly scary because it led to noticeable disfigurement of the hands, feet, and face. The condition's visibility bred a widespread stigma against patients that still persists in some parts of the world today, even though there is a cure thanks to modern medicine. So it makes sense to think that a leprosarium would have been established on an empty island like Petite Moustique, where sufferers could be kept hidden from the public eye and isolated. Hangover prevention ring. Archaeologists have found a relic unlike anything else in history. It's an ancient hangover prevention ring. Forget about raw eggs, a fresh Bloody Mary, or any other hangover cure you may have heard of. During the Byzantine era of Israel, you could simply put on a hangover ring to cure yourself after a rough night of drinking. The ring was found by archaeologists in the city of Yavne. At first glance, it just looks like an ordinary ring. It has a golden band and a gem of purple amethyst. But where it was discovered gives a clue as to its purpose. It was discovered in the largest winery of the 7th century, just a few hundred feet away from a warehouse that once contained hundreds and hundreds of jars used for storing wine. Amir Golani, an archaeologist associated with the Israel Antiquities Authority, says the amethyst gem in the middle was likely used to prevent the unwanted effects of drinking too much wine. Back in the 7th century, when the Byzantine era was coming to an end and the Islamic period was starting, lots of people used gold rings inlaid with an amethyst stone to cure themselves of ailments. Archaeologists have found other such rings worn by elite Romans as recently as in the 3rd century AD. Amethyst is frequently associated with virtue, especially since it's mentioned frequently in the Bible. The ring was an indication of status and wealth, worn by either a man or a woman. Because it was found so close to the winery, experts are almost certain it was used with the express purpose to prevent hangovers. What do you think? Do you like amethyst? Let me know in the comments below. The Roman Gate to Hell. Scientists may have unraveled the mystery behind a deadly cave that the Romans once believed served as a direct gateway to hell. Today, the mysterious cave is located in the ruined city of Hierapolis. According to the legends, any man, woman, or creature that ventured into the cave would die immediately. Turns out, this might not have been a myth at all. Instead, the legend of the deadly cave is grounded firmly in reality. During a study in 2018, researchers were able to determine that poisonous gases were emitted from deep within the cave. These gases could have suffocated anyone and anything that ventured inside of it. Over 2,000 years ago, when people still worshipped many gods and had limited scientific knowledge, it's no surprise that the Romans thought the cave led straight to hell. After all, anyone who strayed into it never came back out. The Romans actually turned the entrance to the cave into a kind of temple. They built a stone doorway around it and used it for horrible ceremonies. Eunuchs, a fancy name for priests that were castrated, would lead bulls down into the depths of the poisonous cave to sacrifice them to their gods. What they didn't know back then, but what the team in 2018 from the University of Duisburg-Essen in Germany learned, is that underground volcanic activity is to blame for the toxic gas. It may look like a portal to the underworld, but it's really just an underground volcano. Beerka. Beerka is an ancient town built by the Vikings about 12 miles away from Stockholm. It's on a small island called Björkö, inside Mälaren Lake. The Viking Age brought a lot of innovations and key events to Europe, greatly shaping the future of what was to come. The Vikings being all about raiding and pillaging as they sailed to the west and east is a popular misconception. While they did travel all over and bring kingdoms to their knees, they were also advanced in many other ways. Their major ports and settlements around Scandinavia were some of the busiest trade hubs full of wealth, and Beerka was one of these settlements. The lake is dotted with multiple islands. Adelso, a neighboring island, was also a key Viking trade center. Adelso was supposedly the royal residence, from which the kings and chieftains ruled over the lands. Historical evidence tells us that Beerka was founded roughly around 750 AD, growing slowly from a small settlement into a larger town. It's also one of the earliest urban settlements in this area of Scandinavia, but for some bizarre reason that no one really knows, the town vanished basically overnight, completely abandoned. Archaeological evidence shows that Beerka, within the span of just a few years, went from the biggest trading hub in the region, connecting the Vikings to civilizations farther away, such as the Slavs, the Byzantine Empire, and even traders from the Orient, to nothing. By the 900s, there was nobody living here. It could have been that they saw too much competition from other traders moving into the area. It also could have been because the water levels of the lake receded, making it difficult for trade ships to even reach the ports of the city. What's left of these well-developed trading networks gives an important glimpse into the past of the Viking Age in Sweden. Ancient tombs. Archaeologists in Turkey have uncovered over 400 creepy tombs decorated with images of grapes and flowers, cut into the rock that date back at least 1800 years. These tombs were crafted in the ancient Greek city of Blandus, right around the 2nd century AD. At the time, the city was actually under Roman occupation. There were still a few Greek colonists in the city, but it was fully under Roman control. The Romans were using these elaborate tombs to bury their family members, and they weren't ordinary burials, but likely involved specialized funeral ceremonies. The Romans created a huge complex with vaulted tombs with the whole crypt sealed behind a massive marble door. The only time anyone was allowed inside was during a burial ceremony. Of course, we don't know exactly what went on in these ceremonies. By the time archaeologists started excavating, the bodies had already been stolen, and everything except the creepy paintings on the walls had been pillaged. What happened to the bodies is anybody's guess. It was hard to imagine why anyone would steal over 400 remains. Hidden Tudor paintings. It's pretty common for people to find things they didn't expect while renovating their home. But not all discoveries are created equal. The Landmark Trust, a British organization dedicated to saving historic buildings, recently found a collection of 16th century Tudor wall paintings at Calvary Old Hall in West Yorkshire, England. Inspectors made what was later described as the discovery of a lifetime during a routine investigation ahead of restorations at the medieval landmark. The artwork was uncovered in a very undistinguished little bedroom, according to Landmark Trust historian Caroline Stanford, who spoke with reporters. At first, the inspectors noticed a mere smattering of color, but it was intriguing enough for them to take a closer look. They continued investigating and found that 3 of the room's walls are covered in the paintings. Stanford explained that it's extremely rare to find Elizabethan artwork on this scale, or in such good condition. The paintings were inspired by artwork that was found in the Roman Emperor Nero's Golden Villa, which was built around 64 AD. A young man discovered the ancient residence in 1480 when he slipped and fell through a hole and into the building. The designs inside soon became famous throughout Italy, England, Germany, and other parts of Europe. Known as grotesque work, the style was what it sounds like. It consisted of bizarre imagery that would be considered ugly or even repulsive by today's standards. But back then, it was all the rage, and it was a sign of being educated and wealthy. The Landmark Trust is scrambling to secure the necessary funding to preserve the fascinating artwork. Time is of the essence, especially since the Calverley Old Hall is one of England's most at-risk buildings. Socks and arm warmers. One of the strangest discoveries to come out of Egypt isn't about mummies or lost statues. It actually has to do with socks and underwear. You may have noticed by now that archaeologists don't really spend a lot of time talking about the clothes worn by ancient Egyptians. Compared to tombs full of treasure and ancient pharaohs, it's just not a popular topic, so it's been largely ignored. But Egyptologist Dr. Alexandra Hallman has taken quite an interest in ancient Egyptian clothes. Through her research, she has found that the Egyptians sort of had an obsession with layers. They would wrap themselves in layers of fabrics, including things like socks, gloves, and underwear. But they didn't wear socks and underwear like you and I do today. They used rectangular pieces of material, either linen or wool, to wrap themselves up in. Things weren't really sewn or fitted. They wrapped themselves up kind of like mummies. For example, they would take a rectangular piece of wool, then wrap it around their feet and up their legs to keep themselves warm. They did the same thing for gloves and underpants, mostly foregoing fitted clothing items like shirts and pants and tunics. Haunted Maya Cave. There is a flooded sinkhole in southern Mexico that is so terrifying the local villagers don't dare go anywhere near it. And for good reason. Deep underground, underwater archaeologists have discovered human bones inside of it. The discovery was made during an underwater survey of the cavern, known as a cenote in Mexico. 2 chambers were found to be littered with the bones of people. Archaeologist Bradley Russell spent over 2 weeks investigating the remains, rappelling over 40 feet into the cave before diving under the surface. This place is located just outside the ancient Maya city of Mayapan. Between the years 1150 and 1450, Mayapan had about 17,000 residents living inside a huge wall surrounding it. It was a major political center with a sacred cenote just outside its limits. Within the city walls, there were at least 40 more of them. The city itself was built where it is because of the easy access to cenotes, but none of the other ones have been found to contain so many human remains. The truth is that the rulers of Mayapan most likely designated this particular cenote to be a place of death. Bradley Russell says it was either a place of sacrifice, where people were killed as offerings to the gods, or a burial pit. It may have been that the Maya used the cenote for people who had been infected with a mysterious plague-like disease. They could have been buried here in order to keep their remains away from the rest of the healthy population. But the truth is that the religious meaning of the human remains in this particular place remains a mystery. And now for a possible contender for the real Atlantis. But first, I want to give a big shout out to Ricky and Rachel Perry, wishing you a very speedy recovery after your operation. Best of luck to you both, and thank you so much for letting us be a part of your day. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about strange, mysterious places and amazing discoveries. Atlantis discovered. For thousands of years, historians have desperately been trying to locate the lost city of Atlantis. None of these attempts have ever been successful. In this day and age, most experts agree that it's likely the city never even existed at all. It was just a story to serve as a warning. And yet, a recent discovery has unveiled a mysterious archaeological site that actually could have been the fabled Atlantis from 3,000 years ago. Archaeologists found the ruins of a structure 200 feet beneath the ground in the ancient city of Akrotiri, which was a village in Santorini in Greece. 3,000 years ago, this city was a large metropolis. It had intricately paved streets, its town square was lined with beautiful houses, and the suburbs boasted massive homes over 4 stories tall. There is no denying that this was an extremely sophisticated city built by an advanced civilization. Just as Plato described how Atlantis fell into the sea, so too did Akrotiri, and it happened right around the time that Plato said it did. There was a series of volcanic eruptions that caused Akrotiri to not only be buried in ash, but to also be lost underwater in the year 1650 BC. The entire civilization was erased in a single day. Some researchers argue that this could be the legitimate Atlantis, but of course it's quite impossible to say for sure. There are many ancient cities that were sunk by earthquakes or volcanic activity, and the quest continues to determine if Atlantis was even actually real. The tomb of Genjis Khan, one of the most interesting and mysterious archaeological locations in the world, has still never been discovered. I'm talking about the tomb of Genjis Khan, conqueror of the world and original ruler of the great Mongol hordes. He's been dead for 800 years, and no one knows where he was buried. Ever since he was laid to rest in this mysterious location, the nomadic Darkad warriors have been protecting it. It's said that when the great Khan died, his funeral procession murdered everyone who witnessed where they were going. After the slaves finished burying the great ruler, the soldiers killed them. And when the soldiers returned from their great journey, they too were massacred. In the end, there was no one left who knew where Genghis Khan was buried. Not even the Darkhad. They were simply given orders to protect a large area where his tomb could be located. 37 generations before now. They were tasked with slaughtering anyone who went into the area, and all these years later, they are still there protecting the secret of the tomb. Of course, they no longer kill people who travel into the region. But that being said, there are 16,000 guards in the area doing all they can to stop archaeologists from coming in. They want to keep the tomb a secret, and so far, they've done an awesome job. Where do you think the tomb of Genghis Khan is? Let me know in the comments below. And I wanted to give a big shout out to Jupiter and Eric P. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, welcome! And be sure to subscribe before you go. We have lots more videos about amazing discoveries coming soon. Monster Skull. In Canada's Yukon Territory, a miner accidentally dug up the fossilized skull of what is being described as an extinct monster. Stuart Schmidt was working near Dawson City when he uncovered the mysterious skull using heavy equipment. He noticed something bizarre sticking out of the gravel. He then climbed out of his machine and pulled the thing out with his hands. It turned out to be the almost perfectly preserved skull of an extinct North American helmeted muskox. Quite different to the modern tundra muskox, which looks a lot like a bison, in case you were wondering. 11,000 years ago, these animals were hunted by the first Native Americans who lived in Canada, eating and killing so many that they went extinct. But back then, these were huge monsters. They were about twice the size of a modern muskox, like mobile battering rams. These bulky giants weighed almost 1,000 pounds. After the discovery of the creepy skull, it was shipped off to paleontologist Grant Zazula with the territorial government. Scientists are now working to study the remains, hoping to carbon date the skull and do some genetic studies. What would you do if you found the prehistoric skull of a monster while at work? Would you hand it over to scientists or mount it on your wall? Let me know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe if you haven't already. Badlands Guardian. When Lynn Hickox got lost on her way to a museum in Alberta, Canada in 2005, she pulled out her phone and loaded Google Earth. She was new to the program and was still learning how to use it, but had the eye of a seasoned pro. While perusing the area with a bird's eye view, Hickox spotted a massive rock formation that looks like a Native American man wearing a headdress and facing westward. The resemblance is uncanny. Known as the Badlands Guardian, the structure dwarfs Mount Rushmore in size, and when you look at its stunning features, it's easy to assume that perhaps a First Nations tribe carved it out of the rock centuries ago, especially since it's in an area traditionally associated with the Blackfoot culture. It would have been an enormous undertaking, especially since the image can only be seen from high above. But believe it or not, the Badlands Guardian was naturally formed. Scientists believe that it's at least several hundred years old, and that it was created during a period of fast erosion caused by heavy winds and flooding. It just happens to be a coincidence that the formation appears to bear indigenous symbolism, making it fascinating in its own right, even though it wasn't carved by human hands. And now for number 4, but first want to give a big shout out to Penny Kerrigan and Jana Highway. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe for more videos about amazing discoveries. Stone Scalpel Brain Surgery. Anthropologists with the Institute of Archaeology of the Russian Academy of Sciences made an astonishing discovery. They were looking at material taken from an excavation back in 2017 near the small Crimean village of Logovskoye. One of the skulls that was removed during the excavation was from a man who had been operated on 5,000 years ago, in the 3rd millennium BC. The researchers found evidence of cranial trepanation, an operation in which a huge area of bone is removed from the human skull. They say the operation was probably done with a stone scalpel as one of the first brain surgeries in human history. It wasn't quite as sophisticated as today, obviously, but it was still surgery. There were 18 other burials where the skull was found, dating from between the Bronze Age to the time of the Scythian warriors. The operation victim was found at the center of one of the burial mounds, buried in a rectangular wooden box with flint arrowheads beside him, indicating his high social status. As for the trepanation surgery, surgery, archaeologists have found at least 15 different skulls from around the same time that also had the operation done. But this specimen has proved to be the most fascinating because it seems that the operation was done by a master surgeon. Somebody scraped an area of bone away with a stone tool to leave a very thin layer of bone plate less than a millimeter thick. They did this without penetrating into the cranial cavity, which could have killed a person. The operation was likely done in the first place for some sort of healing purpose, perhaps to relieve headaches. The Egyptian Sun Temple. In Egypt, a mysterious sun temple has been found buried in the desert. It's been there for about 4,500 years, in Abu Ghorab, slightly south of Cairo. Archaeologists are saying this could be the biggest discovery in decades. The temple is one of 6 that were constructed by the pharaohs during the 5th dynasty. According to Egyptologists, sun temples were built by the pharaohs in order to give them status as a living god. Even though historians agree that 6 of them were built, only 2 have been found, including this newest one. It was most likely built by Nayusera-ini, who ruled sometime in the 25th century BC. All that remains of the structure today is a large base of mud brick, with the remnants of a white limestone pillar. The original structure must have been enormous. It would have been a splendid, pale white marble tower reaching toward the sun. Making the temple this impressive would have been the only way that the pharaoh could have rightly called himself a living god. The wreck of the Santa Maria. Barry Clifford, an underwater investigator in the United States, believes that he has uncovered the final resting place of the Santa Maria. The submerged archaeological site supposedly holds the flagship of Christopher Columbus's famous expedition to the New World. Yeah, that Santa Maria. Clifford says there is strong evidence suggesting Santa Maria is hiding beneath the waves, just off the northern coast of Haiti. Clifford has even managed to take photographs of the wreckage and is currently working with the government of Haiti to protect the site. He is still figuring out how to properly conduct a detailed investigation, but he's almost 100% certain the ship is there waiting for him. The Santa Maria sailed along with La Niña and La Pinta to explore the islands around the Caribbean in 1492, believing they would find a passage to Asia. They never expected to discover North America instead. Columbus lost the Santa Maria shortly before he returned to Spain, and people have been looking for it ever since. If Barry Clifford does find a way to get to the bottom of the ocean to investigate the lost vessel, he will be looking at the first archaeological marine evidence of the European discovery of America. Clifford, along with the government of Haiti and the History Channel, will be documenting his journey to find it for sure. Missing tongue. Archaeologists found the body of a man near the small British village of Stanwick back in 1991. But it wasn't until just recently that Simon Mays, a human skeletal biologist, took a closer look at the mysterious skeleton. What he discovered is nothing short of horrifying. The skeleton is believed to be of a man who lived 1,500 years before today. He was discovered with a flat rock stuffed into his mouth. Why the rock was there was a mystery, but thanks to new advances in science, Simon and his team of researchers were able to determine that the individual suffered an oral infection at the time of death. The infection had spread to several other parts of his body, which probably resulted in his death in the first place. In all likelihood, the infection stemmed from a previous tongue amputation. In other words, his tongue had been cut out of his mouth had gotten infected, and that infection spread through his body and killed him. But to understand just how creepy this discovery is, we need to go back to the rock that was found in his mouth. According to Live Science, there have been multiple burials from between the 3rd and 7th centuries AD in Britain with some eerie similarities. Skeletons have been found with their heads missing, and in place of their head, a rock. Another skeleton with its foot missing had a pot put in place of the foot. The suggestion here is that for whatever bizarre reason, if a person was missing part of their body when they died, whoever buried them would replace it with a rock or a pot to symbolize the missing body part. Unfinished Roman aqueduct. The Roman Empire went down in history for its iconic and innovative structures, which were both elegant and functional. A period known as the Roman Architectural Revolution saw the widespread construction of roads, temples, dams, amphitheaters, aqueducts, bridges, and other engineering marvels. But not all of these ambitious projects came full circle, as one recent discovery shows. While excavating at the ancient city of Artashata in modern-day Armenia, archaeologists found the remains of an unfinished Roman aqueduct bridge. Built between 114 and 117 AD, it's the easternmost arched aqueduct in the Roman Empire. At the time, Emperor Trajan was in power. He oversaw the second largest expansion of the Roman military and also commissioned many public buildings. It was under Trajan's rule that the empire's territory reached its maximum size. He attempted to incorporate the province of Armenia into the empire before he died unexpectedly of a stroke at age 63. Trajan's successor Hadrian relinquished Armenia while the aqueduct was still being built, and it was simply left unfinished. A statement from the University of Munster explained that the structure is evidence of Rome's failed imperial ambitions in Armenia, showing that despite being immensely powerful, the empire wasn't infallible. Stonehenge Graves. As construction crews were gearing up to create a controversial road tunnel beside the world wonder of Stonehenge, they made an accidental discovery. The work to build the tunnel revealed ancient graves dating back more than 4,500 years to around the time that Stonehenge was built. One of these ancient graves even contained a baby, while nearby archaeologists found pieces of prehistoric pottery and buried treasure. Many of these finds can be linked directly to the mysterious Neolithic people who built the monument, the Beerka culture. They prospered from between 4,800 to 3,800 years ago, when the first copper tools had just come into practice. In a nearby pit, archaeologists even found the bones of a woman who died in her 20s curled around an ornate beaker, making it pretty obvious that those buried here were part of the Beerka culture. But what exactly did they have to do with Stonehenge? According to Matt Levers, a consultant for Wessex archaeology, the bodies in the graves were buried at the same time that the main circle of sandstone pillars were erected at the monument. They've also helped give insight to the fact that Stonehenge was built over a very long period of time. It took decades and decades to complete, while people lived nearby and went about their daily life. El Dorado. Archaeologists near Bogotá in Colombia have discovered nearly a dozen strange ceramic jars at a temple that they believe could be connected to the mythical city of gold. Many know this city as El Dorado. The place is said to be so full of riches that anyone who finds it will be rich beyond their wildest dreams. People have searched for the lost city of El Dorado for centuries, but most historians agree that it may not even exist. The ceramic jars found by the archaeologists contained metallic figures and carved emeralds. The jars were crafted as offerings about 600 years ago by the ancient Muisca people, also sometimes called the Chibcha. Researchers say it could have been the Muisca and their phenomenal skills at crafting metal that inspired the original legend of the City of Gold. This legend goes back to 1537, when the Spanish moved in and conquered the region. Most of the indigenous Muisca were either killed by the Spanish during fighting, or they died after becoming infected with diseases. They were almost wiped out completely, but a handful survived, and there are still a few thousand of these natives living today. When the Spanish beat the locals down and started looking through the amazing treasures, they were blown away by the impressive goldwork of the Muisca. The Spaniards took the story of the city of gold in the jungle back home with them, and this very well could have sparked the legend of El Dorado, which still lives on to this very day. The parasite. Speaking of missing a tongue, a horrifying parasite was recently discovered at Galveston Island State Park in Texas. The parasite is a type of creepy marine organism called a tongue-eating louse, or a snapper-choking isopod. It detaches the tongue of its victim and then takes its place. The discovery was made by Corey Evans, a fish biologist with Rice University. He had actually been researching skull shapes in different fish when he came across an Atlantic croaker with something bizarre in its mouth. It turned out to be a type of isopod that embeds a fish through its gills. This tongue-eating louse worms its way through a fish's gills, latches onto the fish's tongue, and then drains it of its blood. It even erodes all the tongue's muscle tissue until there's nothing left except bone. The isopod then attaches itself to the base of the bone where the tongue used to be, thereby becoming the tongue of the fish. It feeds off mucus and tiny bits of whatever the fish eats. Both animals remain alive, the fish doesn't seem to care, and everyone lives a long and happy life together. Still, this is incredibly creepy. According to Evans, these parasitic isopods are extremely common in the Gulf of Mexico. And even though a fish can live a full life with one of these parasites in its mouth, it sometimes will be infected by 2 parasites. A second isopod will move in through the gills, trying to get in on the first one's action. The fish will then have so many of these creatures in its mouth that it's unable to swallow its own food, and starves in just a couple of weeks. Chanchan mass grave. During the 15th century, a group of elite women who lived in the ancient city of Chanchan in modern-day Peru dedicated their lives to weaving textiles. They also remained devoted to their craft in death, as the recent discovery of a mass grave has revealed. Found in what is now the province of Trujillo, the burial contained the remains of 25 people. Most of the individuals were women under the age of 30, and some were teenagers and kids. The women were buried in a seated position with bent legs. Their skeletons were wrapped in a cotton cloth and then an outer cloth made from plant fiber. The deceased were surrounded by needles, spindles, and other equipment that was used for making textiles, suggesting that the women were career textile workers. In addition to these tools, archaeologists found a number of grave goods, including dozens of ceramic objects. 30 isn't considered old today, but back then, the average human life expectancy was no more than 40 years, so the women in the grave weren't considered young when they died. Based on the items they were buried with, experts believe that they were high-ranking members of their society. Chanchan was the capital of the Chimu Empire and the largest pre-Columbian city in the Americas. The civilization peaked during the 15th century, shortly before it was conquered by the Incas in 1470. While it was customary for the Chimu culture to practice human sacrifice, there are no signs that the people in the newly discovered burial were killed during sacrificial rituals. But there is evidence that the individuals were laid to rest at 2 separate times, and that some of the remains were possibly transported to the grave from another burial site. A Maya canoe. Something amazing was just discovered in Mexico, and for once, it's not a temple or a secret underground lair used by the Aztecs. This time, it's a simple canoe thought to be over 1,000 years old. Researchers discovered the ancient boat, along with other mysterious artifacts, near the ruins of Chichen Itza. It was discovered submerged inside a cenote, which is basically a freshwater sinkhole. The relic measures around 5 feet long and 2 feet wide. It was likely used by the ancient Maya to gather water from the sinkhole since it was fresh. Either that, or it was used so that they could bring offerings into the cenote and then dump them in the hole as sacrifices to their gods. Maybe both. The truth is, researchers just don't know yet. Workers with the National Institute of Anthropology and History were able to tentatively date the canoe to being crafted between 830 and 950 AD. It was discovered during the ongoing construction of the controversial Maya train, meant to be a railway that will connect tourist sites throughout the Yucatan. The big issue is that while connecting some of the major sites, that train is actually destroying previously undiscovered sites of great value. But at the same time, it's finding new and interesting artifacts like this ancient Mayan boat. Nanmadul. Nanmadul is located in Micronesia, about 5,570 miles from California in the Pacific Ocean. It's the second most popular archaeological site in Oceania after Easter Island. And much like Easter Island, Nanmadul is wildly unique. It's the only ancient city that was literally built over a coral reef. It remained the political seat of the Baudelaire dynasty for at least 1,000 years, only coming to an end in 1628. But the real mystery here is that no one knows exactly what the city looked like or who even built it and when. Most of what archaeologists have to go on is a legend, like the one that says Nanmadul was built by a pair of sorcerers. They needed a place to worship Nanisan Sapa, god of agriculture. They then built the city itself using the help of a flying dragon to move the giant stones. When the first sorcerer died, his brother became the first ruler, and that was how the dynasty started. There probably isn't much truth to the dragon legend, and all we really know is that the reef city was ultimately abandoned around 500 years ago. Because Nanmadul was built over the top of a reef, there really isn't much of it left today. Harsh weather in the Pacific, mixed with time and neglect, has all but erased the history of the people who once called Nanmadul home. Saudi Arabia's Forgotten Kingdoms. There are several forgotten kingdoms in Saudi Arabia and many lost archaeological sites that have only recently come back to us through extensive study. For example, Al-Ula only opened to tourists in 2019, and this place is enormous. It was built over 2,000 years ago by the Nabateans, the people that came before the Egyptians. Two more forgotten kingdoms are the Dadanite and the Leonite, two civilizations that flourished 2,000 years ago and were even mentioned in the Old Testament. Both of these kingdoms controlled the trade routes to the region of Arabia for about 900 years, until 100 AD when the Romans showed up and conquered the area. As a result, there is almost nothing left of the amazing cities that they built, with the exception of Al-Ula. Al-Ula covers an area of about 11,000 square miles. It was built by the Leonites with high stone walls to keep out invaders, along with hundreds of mud houses occupied by the desert dwellers. After the Romans came and destroyed most of the Nabateans, they did away with Al-Ula, leaving it to fall to dust. Dakota Ghost Town. An archaeological team working with the Nebraska State Historical Society may have just discovered the creepy remains of a cemetery that has been lost since the 19th century. In Dakota County near Omaha Creek, researchers are seeking further evidence of a cemetery once belonging to the town of Amadi. A few of the residents who had lived in the area for quite some time had heard stories about this long-lost Amadi cemetery, also known as Sand Ridge. But there had never been any photographs, headstones, or any other evidence to confirm the stories. Amadi's founding in 1856 was more than 10 years before Nebraska was even a state. The population here peaked at about 400 citizens, but before long, the waters of the Missouri River started to wash the town away. Combined with the boom in gold mining in nearby Colorado, the population of the town dropped from 400 to only around a dozen. By 1865, shortly after the town was founded, the place was a ghost town. All these years later, scientists finally decided to track down the abandoned cemetery used during the decade that Amadi was a booming village. It's estimated there are at least 30 people buried in the missing cemetery. The scientists had to use ground-penetrating radar over the plot of land where they believed the cemetery once stood. Today, the land is nothing but a field of grass where wildflowers grow. Unfortunately, the archaeologists are still investigating the radar images that they took. And while it does appear that something or someone is hidden underground here, there hasn't been any official announcements yet. Naked shark. In July of 2019, fishermen in the Mediterranean Sea were pulling in their nets when they discovered a rare, unusual, and creepy discovery. Among hundreds of fish, sharks, and a variety of other marine life, there was a black-mouthed cat shark. Strangely, it had no skin or skin-related structures. It didn't even have any teeth in its mouth. This is extremely different from something like albinism, which is actually quite common. Scientists have found lots of sharks that have skin and pigmentation abnormalities, but this unusual naked shark is the first discovery of its kind, a living shark with no skin or teeth. And somehow, it was living a perfectly ordinary life before these fishermen rudely pulled it from its home in the sea. The fishermen handed the shark over to scientists who were able to determine it was 3 years old. It even had a belly full of food before the fishermen killed it. What's really baffling scientists now is how a shark with no teeth or skin managed to live for 3 years hunting other fish. It had a total of 14 food items in its stomach when researchers did the autopsy, including bony fishes, crustaceans, and even small cephalopods. Perhaps this is the world's only real-life gummy shark. Mercury poisoning. It's common knowledge today that mercury is incredibly dangerous to the human body. Exposure to the heavy metal can cause a host of unpleasant and potentially fatal symptoms, including muscle weakness, speech impairment, loss of coordination, a pins and needles sensation, tremors, insomnia, emotional disturbances, memory loss, and more. Before people knew that mercury is dangerous, many cultures touched or ingested it regularly, and some even assigned supernatural power to it. For example, during the 3rd century BC, the first Chinese emperor Qin Shi Huang drank mercury because he thought it would make him immortal. But instead of achieving eternal life, he unknowingly poisoned himself to death. During the 19th century, Abe Lincoln took mercury pills for his anxiety, believing that they had medical value. He only stopped when he realized that the tablets were making him feel worse. It wasn't until the mid-20th century that scientists realized that mercury is dangerous, bringing a long overdue end to the belief that it's beneficial in any way. But when did our history of using it begin? A new study detected the earliest known evidence of mercury poisoning in humans in 5,000-year-old remains that were found in Spain and Portugal. In an attempt to answer the question of how common mercury use was during ancient times, researchers analyzed bones belonging to 370 people who lived over a 5,000-year time span. They detected unusually high levels of mercury in some of the samples, which they believe were caused by exposure to cinnabar, a toxic mineral with a bright red hue that was used as a paint pigment. Cinnabar was first mined around 7,000 years ago during the Neolithic period. The remains with the highest amounts of mercury were dated between 2900 and 2300 BC, at the tail end of the era. By then, cinnabar had become a highly sought-after sacred substance in some cultures. Whether people ingested it on purpose or by accident is a mystery. Cinnabar use greatly decreased around 2200 BC at the start of the Bronze Age, but as you learn today, humanity was just getting started with its affinity for mercury. Stone ram heads. In Egypt, at the spectacular archaeological site of Luxor, experts have uncovered new stone ram heads along the Avenue of Sphinxes. There were no bodies found, or any other parts of the statues. They simply found giant ram heads, 3 of them to be exact. The discovery was made as part of a restoration attempt to get the Avenue of the Sphinxes back to its former glory. For those who aren't sure what the Avenue is, it's a road over 3,000 years old that connects Karnak Temple and Luxor Temple. It's 1.7 miles long and 23 feet wide, with hundreds of sphinxes on either side, guarding the procession like silent sentinels. But these sphinxes are peculiar because they have ram heads instead of traditional human heads. The sphinxes are perched on bases of sandstone, facing opposite of one another with the avenue between them. They are the guardians that watch over the passage between the 2 most famous temples in all of Egypt. According to archaeologist Mustafa al-Waziri, one of the newly dug-up ram heads was dedicated to King Amenhotep III. It was found with a hole in its head where a cobra should have been placed, signifying Amenhotep III's crown. He ruled between 1390 and 1353 BC, overseeing many of the most important building projects in Egypt. An ancient fortified structure from the Hellenistic period has been unearthed in central Israel. It was found in the Lachish forest, or at least what little remains of it was found. Archaeologists uncovered rusted weapons, burned wooden beams, and plenty of ancient coins. According to the Israel Antiquities Authority, this evidence proves the story of a battle between the Hasmoneans and the Greek Seleucids about 2,100 years before today. Just in case you don't know, the Hasmoneans were descendants of the Maccabi family, an ancient dynasty of Judeans who ruled Judea from between 140 BC to 37 AD. These people were on the offensive 2,000 years ago, trying to take out the Hellenistic Greek army. But the Greeks had known they were coming and built a defensive line, with part of that line being this ancient fortress just discovered. But as archaeologists can tell from the state of the ruins, with the discarded weapons and burned timbers, the Greeks had not held their defensive line successfully. The Hasmoneans blew through, torching everything as they went. All that's left of the fortification today are some busted rocks, lost coins, and burnt chunks of wood. But what's truly fascinating is that the discovery of the fort proves that this battle really did happen. The battle is the reason for a celebration called Hanukkah that is still practiced to this very day. It's a celebration of the Hasmoneans defeating the Hellenists, which ultimately led to the very first sovereign Jewish entity. The Chichen Itza Ossuary. The Chichen Itza Ossuary in Mexico on the Yucatan Peninsula is one of the most mysterious archaeological sites left behind by the Maya. It looks like an oddly shaped pyramid with steps cascading down from the top. Originally, it was part of a monumental complex that researchers believe helped the ancient people communicate with the gods of the underworld. The structure measures about 30 feet high and is composed of 9 staggered bodies. The pyramid still has its original decoration, including all kinds of mythological snakes, birds, gods, and scary-looking masks. But the creepiest part of the ossuary is an entrance at its top, leading to a deep staircase and a tunnel that goes underground for nearly 10 miles. During the time the Maya still lived here, this was likely a secret passage that led from the bottom of the ossuary to a different Maya city, likely Yaxuna. The Maya didn't actually dig the tunnel, it was already there. They built the ossuary at the entrance to a natural underground cavern. And while we don't know for sure, this underground landscape may have also been viewed as the actual underworld to the Maya. According to legends, these tunnels or caverns represent the gate between the world of the dead and paradise. Mummy and skull. A truly creepy mummy was recently discovered in the ancient city of Luxor in Egypt, when its tomb was opened for the first time in 3,500 years. What made this mummy exceptionally creepy? It was surrounded by over 450 statues and funeral masks, as well as skulls and bones, coffin fragments, and more. According to the Egyptian Antiquities Minister, the tomb was probably made during the 18th dynasty, between the rule of King Amenhotep II and King Thutmose IV. Researchers don't actually know who the creepy mummy was during their life, but they are fairly certain it was someone important. They were definitely important enough that after being mummified and placed in their tomb, skulls of other people were left behind. Perhaps 3,500 years ago, the skulls were those of servants, sacrifices, or something else meant to keep the mummy company while they journeyed to the afterlife. There is still a great deal of the tomb that is unexplored, so we'll have to wait for more information to be revealed. Planned population growth. The exact reasons for the collapse of the ancient Maya civilization are unclear. Experts have long believed that numerous factors contributed to its downfall, including a burgeoning population that the culture's agricultural system couldn't support. But a recent study found that this narrative might be flawed. Using LiDAR technology, which enables researchers to see structures that are hidden beneath thick foliage, researchers from Brandeis University surveyed a portion of former Maya territory situated along the modern-day border between Mexico and Guatemala. Then, they searched the same area on foot. The team found extensive evidence of a sophisticated irrigation system in and around Maya settlements, but there was a conspicuous lack of signs that a population boom had occurred there. These findings contradict the theory that the Maya couldn't produce enough food to feed its population. At the very least, it showed that some settlements lived comfortably. The researchers' initial goal wasn't to challenge the idea that agriculture couldn't keep up with the civilization's growth. They were originally hoping to learn more about how the Maya lived in the region, which isn't as thoroughly studied as some others. The realization that residents lived far less hand-to-mouth than the team expected was simply an added bonus. The oldest doodle. About 73,000 years ago in the Stone Age, somebody was experimenting with a new form of artwork. For the first time, a human decided to try out drawing. Archaeologists recently found the remains of this individual's abstract doodle on the floor of a South African cave. The Stone Age person, or a caveman if you prefer, had made a drawing on the wall of the cave with a makeshift piece of crayon. According to Paul Petit, an archaeologist at Durham University in the United Kingdom, this act marked the beginning of symbolic activity in human society. The discovery was made inside the Blombos cave, where prehistoric Homo sapiens lived between 100,000 and 72,000 years before today. For some bizarre reason, they were some of the most artistic stone people anywhere on Earth. Archaeologists have previously discovered beads made from sea snail shells, say that 5 times fast, and chunks of ochre used to draw geometric patterns. But this newest discovery is of what appears to be a hashtag symbol drawn with ochre, doodled rather than painted. Not only is this one of the first doodles ever done, but it also might just be the first hashtag in history, tens of thousands of years before Twitter made the symbol so popular. Castle beneath the basketball court. Underneath a basketball court in Gloucester, England, archaeologists have found a castle. To be more particular, they have found pieces of a Norman castle underneath the basketball court of a prison. The experts are saying that this castle may have once been similar to the Tower of London, which can still be found today just close to the London Bridge. The walls of the castle at the prison have been dated back to around 1110, with archaeologists saying there are more sections of the castle buried under other parts of the prison. Because of extensive English records of the area, archaeologists already know which castle they're dealing with. It was the first one ever built in Gloucester, boasting 3 chapels, a pair of drawbridges, and an immense royal chamber where the king and queen shared a bed. It was the epitome of Norman architecture, according to Neil Holbrook with Cotswold Archaeology. He says that as you entered Gloucester 1,000 years ago, you would have been greeted by a grand view of the cathedral and the castle, showing off just how important the city was. But then, how did it end up beneath the basketball court of a prison? Well, it was lost in 1790. The castle had already been used as a jail for 200 years. Then, in 1780, William Blackburn built his own prison on the site. When he built his prison, much of the old castle was either destroyed or built over. Underwater mystery ruins. There is a mysterious underwater archaeological site off the coast of British Columbia in Canada. Located in the Comoe estuary, Over 150,000 wooden stakes spread across the intertidal zone like wooden arms reaching out of the water. They can only really be seen at low tide, looking like the remnants of some kind of huge settlement once built on the floor of what is now ocean. But the truth is that these are actually ancient fish traps. The small wooden stakes sticking out from the water represent at least 300 fish traps. Some were erected as recently as 100 years ago, but others go back 1,300 years. Together, the fish traps create one of the very first commercial fisheries ever built in Canada. At its peak, this place provided food for up to 12,000 indigenous Ka'omoks. If you're curious as to how 300 fish traps all work at the same time, I'll try to tell you. They work based on a knowledge of fish behavior and tidal range. Each trap had a removable wooden panel that would let water through, but not fish. When the tide rose, fish would follow the center of the trap since it mimicked the shoreline and seemed completely natural to them. But then, as the tide receded, the fish got stuck with nowhere to go and were stranded in shallow pools of water. The natives would then gather all the fish up and take them back to be prepared for eating. Perfect. But the craziest thing about the site is that no one even knew what it was until 2002. The natives in the area had known about the stakes for decades, but it wasn't until anthropologist Nancy Green took an interest and began to actually research them that anything was made public knowledge. When she studied them and took into account the oral history, the results were amazing. The stakes actually formed a constellation, outlining one of the most sophisticated and extensive indigenous fishing operations ever discovered. Roman's battle dagger. A man with a metal detector discovered a dagger that once belonged to a Roman soldier. The dagger dates back to about 2,000 years ago, and the soldier may have used it in a fierce battle before losing it forever. The man who found it is an amateur archaeologist in Switzerland. The impressive dagger was not the only thing that was discovered on the lost battlefield. It was only one of hundreds of artifacts left behind after a brutal fight between Roman legionaries and Rhaetian warriors. This came at a time when Rome was trying to consolidate their power in the area. The Rhaetian were a group of Alpine warriors who occupied the mountainous areas of Austria, Italy, Germany, and Switzerland. They were literally people of the Alps, and they may have even been related to the Etruscans, those who lived in Italy and held power in the area before the Romans rose up and squashed them. When the Romans needed to expand in the 2nd century BC, they had no choice but to take over the mountain homelands of the Rhaetian. The campaign was successful, though not without its casualties. The unknown warrior's dagger may have been buried on the battlefield purposely when the dust had settled, as a symbolic token of appreciation for the victory. Thanks for watching! Which of these strange discoveries was your favorite? Let me know in the comments below, and remember to hit that subscribe button and check out more of the great archaeology videos from the channel. See you next time. Bye!